Hey there guys, Big Rob, just a guy over 50, travel nurse, back here in Alaska. Finished up a contract in the Dalles, Oregon, fixing up my place. Spent about, I don't know, 3 hours mowing the damn lawn because it was so high. Weed eating around my spot, trying to get it all looking nice and fresh and everything, but Alaska's, balmy 65 degrees tonight. Probably get down to about 60, maybe 58. But, yeah, no snakes, just a few bugs, that kind of thing. But, finished up this last contract and was feeling pretty good about it. It was one of the COVID contracts, ICU in a place called the Dalles, Oregon. Nice hospital, nice people. Patients were ranged anywhere from community-acquired pneumonia, had to go on a ventilator, DKA, things like that in the ICU. Very little in the way of trauma, gunshot wounds, or that kind of stuff. Quite a few surgeries going on there. Some general surgeons doing some good work over there. But if there's nothing in the ICU, of course, you get floated out the floor. You take 4 ridiculous tele patients who do nothing but bang on the call light or wander around the hospital all night long. So that's kind of the way that is. But it was a good contract. Met a lot of really nice people. Had a great time. But I want to talk a little bit about the bitching going on Facebook. Oh my God, these mosquitoes are going to kill me. The complaining going on Facebook. And if you haven't been a travel nurse for very long, there are some things in some of my other videos that I explain to people, some subtleties that are part of travel nursing that you don't see in staff nursing. So if you're gonna get into travel nursing because of the money's good and always has been. I've been travel nursing since probably 2010, where I did some local travel in Denver for a while, different places, learned a lot of different things. Like one day I would work in, interventional radiology. Next day I'd work in a pain center or an outpatient surgery center. The next day after that would be ICU or ER or something along those lines. But I hustled for those shifts from different organizations. I was getting paid from 3 or 4 different people. It was a lot to keep up with, but I had previously owned a business before that. So the finances from the business perspective, and that's how I conducted sort of my practice, was as a business. This person, this agency owes me this for this 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours, whatever. Anyway, I'm seeing a lot of complaining lately about the wages, and I want to talk about that a little bit. The wages traditionally in travel nursing are a little bit higher, and here's why they're higher. Well, there's market forces at work. And we know that the hospital administrators really want Washington to set cap our wages. There's no other business in the United States where hospital business administrators go to Congress and try to get laws passed to manipulate the market and try to deliberately drive the wages of one sector down so they can force those nurses into taking staff jobs. But no other market does that. And so I understand that effort failed horribly in Washington, and in fact was basically ignored until it went away. So the hospital administrators and some of these larger hospital conglomerate organizations taking it upon themselves to do this, as well as your agencies. Some of your agencies are out there ripping folks off too. So here's why that's happening. So a lot of people don't know these hospital systems are owned by private equity groups. Private equity group is a group of individual investors who get together, they pool their resources, and they buy businesses. And sometimes they buy these businesses to prop them up, squeeze as much profit out of them as they can, then sell them off. In other cases, these private equity groups, what they do is they buy failed businesses and they liquidate their business assets, up to and including their pensions. And so equipment, things like that, all that shit gets sold off. But a lot of hospitals are these big hospital systems are owned or invested into by private equity groups. And they get a huge share of these companies, and they have financial decision-making authority in these companies. So that's what's kind of going on with that. And, if they can figure out a way to get more work out of a doctor, nurse practitioner, providers, people that actually generate revenue for these hospital systems, then they're going to do that. The other thing is they're going to try to get as much labor as cheaply as possible to do as much as possible so they can turn over patients. They don't really, I don't think that they really care based on their policies in terms of outcomes and stuff like that. I mean, they have Press Ganey and HCAP scores and all that bullshit. And they care about that in terms of reimbursement, but in actual patient outcomes, who knows if they really care about that. So that being said, that is the reason they are trying to reduce the wages of nurses, or force them to relook at staffing models, particularly in critical care areas. I've heard of ICU nurses taking 3 very sick people and having to make some really, really tough decisions about where they spend their time. So that is a thing that's happening. But the complaining about the wages, you guys need to know that the wages typically go down in the summer. Why? Because they just graduated a whole new slew of nurses out of college, whether that's a BSN programs or community colleges. And these nurses are cheap. They'll get them in, they'll orient them for 3 weeks or 6 weeks. If they did some sort of capstone in the same hospital they're working in, then they'll probably cut their orientation down by at least a third. In the last hospital I was working at, they had a number of new nurses out of school working there, and they were being oriented to charge positions in just a couple of weeks. And so this is not uncommon for these hospital systems to do that. And these smaller hospitals, they have to kind of do what they need to do in terms of labor. But if they get a group of nurses, say, it's a tinier hospital, maybe 50, 60 beds, and they get in, like 15 nurses from the nursing program, they don't think about it in terms of like I think about it. I'm thinking, okay, fully a third of these young nurses are probably not going to be here in a couple of months. They're probably going to try to find city jobs or more high-paying jobs. They're going to do what's necessary to feed their families and pay their fucking loans. So a third of them will be gone. They'll go to work for insurance companies, or they'll go to work in nursing homes where they pay more, but they work people into the ground in those places. Just know that. Or they'll try to upgrade their practice model. They'll go from telemetry to PACU, or they'll go to step down unit or ICU, someplace where the hospital's offering that training and is willing to do that for them. So that's one thing that will happen. The other third will probably stick around for 6 months. And then they'll also follow the same pattern. They'll look for something a little bit better, a little bit more clinically as well as professionally rewarding. Or they might go back to school. I mean, who knows? And then 1/3 will stay for a year or more. And so that's typically how I see that playing out. In the meantime, the travelers are sent away, and the hospital is thinking that they're saving money by getting rid of those travelers. But the reality is travel nurses in sheer dollars are relatively cheap labor for the hospital, and here's why. The hospital isn't paying payroll taxes for travel nurses. They're not paying the $700 or $800 a month per person portion of your health insurance premium. They're not paying your workman's comp premium. They're not paying all of the accounting expenses that are associated with credentialing you and orienting you, and they're not paying for your education expenses. They're not paying for the things that you see yourself, or I hear people complaining about. Things like, oh, I showed up at the hospital and now I have to pay for a piss test. I have to pay for N95 fitting. I have to pay for my labs. I have to pay for titers. I have to pay for all this different stuff. Welcome to travel nursing. Yeah, you have to take a lot of that on your own. And that's why travel nursing is super important, that you're the type of person who does a lot of forward thinking, a lot of tries to solve a lot of problems before you even get out to your contract location. So all of that should be handled through your agency, though. They should make sure that you have all that before you show up. And if you can't do that, if you're like me, you live in a town where you can't just walk into the hospital and get an N95 test. You got to figure it out. Usually it's an occupational health clinic, or some sort of if you try to do it through your doctor's office, shit's just going to be expensive. Like I had a two-step, it wasn't two-step PPE, it was the gold tops for TB done, and $279 to get that done. Go to the health department, you can get it done for $75. But the point I'm trying to make here is that these market forces with the new nurses are what's driving the rates down. But on a side note, you got to keep an eye on your agency. And one of the things I talk about a lot in choosing an agency is transparency. So in case you don't know how it works, your agency signs on with a vendor management services. Usually it's Medifis. But there are some other ones out there, hospitals that service these hospitals. Medifis is the largest one that I know of. But they sign on with these Medifis databases, and that's where your contracts come from. So Medifis puts these contracts for these different hospitals out on their database. You decide where you want to go, what state you want to work in. Maybe you want to work in a compact state because you have a compact license, that kind of thing. But Medifis is where those contracts come from, and they get a piece of your hourly dollar. And so a lot of people don't know that the the money exchange goes to Medifis from the hospital, your payroll, through Medifis, and then into your agency. Your agency decides what your margin is going to be. Now, what I mean by margin, your margin is the difference between what the agency gets paid for you and what they pay you. And so let's say, for example, the agency's being paid $100 an hour for you to be there, and they're only paying you $65. So their margin is that $35, and that's roughly 30%. And it's not always that way, so you got to find out. And if they're not willing to tell you, finish your contract with that agency and find an agency that is willing to tell you. Because what you want in an agency, first of all, when it comes to wages, is that to know that they're not hiding anything. And I advised in one of my other videos, if you have the 1-800 number for your payroll memorized, then you've been on the phone about your check too often with these people, and they apparently are unwilling or incapable of making sure that your payroll check is correct. And I mean, if you're working 36 hours a week, it should be the same every week, not a little bit here, a little bit less here, then a little bit more the next week, and that kind of bullshit. We don't want that. We want our checks to be the same, regardless of what your payroll policies are, those kinds of things. If I work 36 hours, I want to be paid the same because I want my money to be predictable. And speaking of predictability, I wouldn't advise hiring on with any agency or locums that doesn't pay you at least every week. Okay. There are some out there like Accountable. Will do that. Apparently, no, I haven't worked for Snap. I've never worked for them. I got some friends that work for them, but apparently they get paid every day. So that sounds kind of nice if you've got bills coming in and you just need to get them paid. They pay every day. It's kind of cool. At Accountable, they used to pay me on what's called a cash card, and I like that. They pay me every day, and I would use that cash card to pay bills. And so anyway, some things to think about. The wages are going down because they've just graduated a whole bunch of nurses, and you have hospital administrators trying to drive the wages down so that they can get cheaper nurses, cheaper travel nurses. So that being said, you're taking on a lot of risk when you travel to a hospital system, especially if it's a long way away from your home. So don't buy anything like new trucks, new RVs. Don't mortgage anything until you've knocked out a couple of contracts. And the reason I say that is because if you've never owned an RV, it's not an easy thing to drag those things up and down the road. There's a lot of safety considerations, buying used versus buying new. If you know somebody who's in that business and can help you buy a used one, I would do that so that you can pay cash for it. But never, you don't want to get into this lifestyle thinking it's all going to be peaches and cream, because it's not. And so anyway, what I would do is knock out your first couple of contracts, see if you like the business, and see if you like your agency, see if they're going to be the types of people that chop your wages 50% when you get on contract or after you've been there for a month. And I would also tell you that don't mortgage anything. Make sure your family's on board with what you're planning to do. Make sure you've got a couple of years of experience in the specialty that you're planning to travel with, and just know that specialties pay a little bit more. ER, ICU, PACU, the biggest payers right now are OB and cardiovascular operating room. So if you've got experience in those areas, yeah, you can make a ton of money, more than CRNAs. So, but you're gonna get worked. I mean, that's just the way it is. You're gonna get worked. This is not easy work. Don't go into traveling because you think it's easy, and definitely don't go in it for just the money. I do it because I don't want to. Well, I worked in hospital systems my first, 15 years. I owned a business for a while, several years, and I worked in these hospital systems, and I just got sick of the way I was being treated, and so. They want you to get all these credentials: CCRN, CEN, TNCC, ACLS, BLS, PALS, ENPC, and all this kind of stuff that I carried for years. It never made a difference in terms of how much I got paid. And so I was committed to these hospital organizations: the University of Chicago, University of Colorado, big hospital systems. I did all the laddering and all that kind of stuff, the professional laddering, and never really made a difference. I was spending a lot of time doing that, but it never really made a difference in terms of how well I was being paid. So it was always around that 25, then 30, 32, 35, and got mosquitoes. But anyway, just think about that when you're travel nursing. Don't mortgage anything after your first, until you've banged out a few contracts and you understand it's a lifestyle. It really is a great lifestyle, especially if you can, get your spouse to participate. Like, they come out and they spend time with you, and you get to travel around, see some things, whatever the city or community you're in has to offer, or the state that you're in has to offer. I know my time in Oregon was fabulous. I spent a lot of time up and down the coast early in the year. Now, it was cold as hell, but there were a lot of bargains out there. Lots of stuff wasn't open yet. So anyway, well, that's it. I just wanted to just kind of talk about the wages and talk about agencies a little bit. Like I said, I see a lot of complaining about having to pay for your tests and having to pay for things, and just with the understanding that, these things, if you put a little planning in there, you can actually get your agency to help you with things like your housing and stuff. And depending on what kind of agency you work for, they'll provide their housing. I know Fast Staff is really good at that. But if you're working for an agency, like I was working for an agency years ago, back in 2015, I guess, 2016. So I called them up to talk to them about housing, and some cluckhead sent me a list of Craigslist listings in the town. And I was like, well, I can do that. I can do that. But what happened was, I got there and my housing had followed through, and they didn't have a plan. So, you're on your own. You got to take the initiative and figure out how you're going to live while you're out there. So, but I'll be doing another video about this RV lifestyle. I did it for a little while, to Wichita Falls, Texas, and then Maine. I actually stayed in Maine late spring, early summer, till about the middle of summer, and then headed back to Texas and back up to Alaska for a while. But it was an interesting RV experience. We bought a used RV and a used truck and dragged this big old beast across across the United States, from Texas all the way to Maine. And it was a great experience. Had a good time. There were definitely some ups and downs with the RV, repairs that had to be made. I know that when we picked it up, dragged it all the way to Jacksonville, I backed it into a tree and damn near knocked one of the air conditioners off the top of it. $1,500 to get that fixed, and it took a while because we had to wait till we were, stationary and all that kind of stuff. But the good news is it had two air conditioners, and it wasn't that hot outside. So anyway, it's Big Rob, travel nurse, just a guy over 50. Just a little bit of information about your wages and about your agencies, and a little bit about travel nursing. Peace out to you guys.